Hello, my name is Philip Plotch, and I'm the principal researcher here at the Eno Center for Transportation. Welcome to the latest in our series of webinars. Eno is an independent, nonpartisan, and nonprofit think tank that shapes public debate on multimodal transportation issues. Today, we're discussing collaboration, leadership, and overcoming complex political challenges. We have three experts on this topic. Peter Rogoff is the head of a consulting firm that provides strategic business and policy guidance across all transportation modes. He was the CEO at Sound Transit, the agency which is undertaking the most ambitious transit expansion program in the country. He's also been the administrator at the Federal Transit Administration. Roger Millar is the Secretary of Transportation for the state of Washington. And he certainly understands coalitions because he's the president of AASHTO, that's the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials. And he's also been the chair of the Intelligent Transportation Society of America. Jen Ellis is here, senior research fellow at Oxford Brookes University, which is an hour outside of London. She specializes in the areas of innovation and metropolitan governance. And she's the co-author, along with me, of a new book that just came out last week titled Mobilizing the Metropolis. Now, Peter, Roger, and Jen are each going to talk for a few minutes, and then we're going to open this webinar up for questions. You can enter your questions in the Q&A box on the side of your screen at any time, and we're going to get to as many of them as possible. Now, here at Eno, we're happy to offer our webinars free of charge. If you're interested in supporting our work, you can check out the link in the chat box to donate or become a member. And with that, let's start with Peter Rogoff.
Great, Phil. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Great. Well, thanks for convening this, and thanks to the Eno Foundation for bringing us all together. I'm going to talk for a few minutes about an issue that's sort of been front of mind for me in recent months, and that is board governance of transportation agencies and how best to use board members, whether we're talking about airport authorities, transportation commissions, transit agency boards, port authority boards. My central point is that these agencies can and should use their boards to help solve community concerns rather than just have them be loud and insistent mouthpieces for those concerns. And I'm going to explain this both in the context of several different boards, but also in relation to the disjointed issues of hamburger restaurants and Native American burial grounds. You know, boards of directors are very often a reflection of their community. They've been appointed because they represent a certain municipality or they represent a certain critical interest or a certain stakeholder group. But a real critical question is whether they see their role as being a mouthpiece for the stakeholder group that they're there for exclusively, or whether they see their role as also being a flag carrier for the agency on the board of which they sit. And quite frankly, in my experience, I have found that board members can be an absolute critical and frankly irreplaceable asset when dealing with difficult, especially local political challenges, in serving as the agency's agent, sometimes the whisperer into a neighboring mayor's ear. And it works with a great deal of success, frankly, more success than we can always have just as staff articulating the agency's position. But the one thing that everyone needs to understand is to get your board members into that place where they are both feeling confident to serve in that role. It takes a ton of work. At Sound Transit, we had a board administration staff of 5 people, which is unusually large, but in reality, if anything, I would have made it larger. Roger Millar serves as one of our board members, and we just found that, you know, the best thing that we could get out of our board is to make sure that they were fully informed, because when they're fully informed, you can get them fully invested in the agency's success, fully committed to that success, and fully cognizant of their role to help solve problems, not just create problems at the behest of another stakeholder group. One of the ways you do that, obviously, is one has to play it very straight up with board members as to what really is going on the ground. What you are telling them the truth is has to mirror what they are hearing from other folks and what they are seeing on the street themselves, and sometimes even riding the service. But once you've got them in that place, you can really put those board members to work. And I'm going to use the example of a couple of hamburger restaurants to make my point. Um, just south of Seattle is the city of Kent. And they elected a new mayor some years ago named Dana Ralph. And no sooner did she become mayor that they got to celebrate the opening of Dick's Drive-In, a popular hamburger restaurant in Seattle that was then spreading its wings to other parts of the region. But no sooner did she attend the grand opening of the Dick's Drive-In that Sound Transit put that property on a potential site to demolish it for a light rail maintenance facility. Um, quite frankly, I don't think she disagreed with this representation. She and the community positively freaked out, and we had to basically slowly talk them back from the ledge and have facts fill all of the misinformation that was out there. And that is also, again, a critical role that boards can produce and provide, actually bringing facts to fill the void, to where, because sometimes 90% of the upset comes from the absence of facts, and you can make 90% of it go away when you actually vet the facts. In any event, what a lot of the local members of our board observed is that Mayor Ralph was a new mayor, and we had, if you will, more seasoned mayors from neighboring communities talk Mayor Ralph back from the ledge successfully. We did not, in the end, demolish that property. We heard their concerns and found a better way to go. But it was really, I would argue, the board members themselves that did that work, not the staff. But it's because we got them in a place where they prepared to do that work. Go farther south, and you're in the city of Fife. And in the city of Fife, there is a hamburger joint called the Pick Quick Drive-Through. And Mayor Kim Roscoe of Fife, a city that's known mostly for its two huge casinos run by the Puyallup Tribe of Indians, and a whole strip of RV dealerships, and a highway widening project of Rogers that some people think will never end. Um, they She just told us straight out as we were figuring out a light rail alignment through her city. It's one of the reasons we were pleased to have her on our board, because you can work through so many local problems when the mayor is on your board. Um, she told us to avoid the Pickwick. It's just not worth the hassle, especially if we could run the alignment either across the street or some other street. And we heard her. Well, why are those little relationships relating to hamburger restaurants so important? I should say parenthetically, there's a uproar going on in Austin, Texas right now about a hamburger joint called Dirty Martin's that could be taken out by the originally proposed Orange Line. But those little examples and how you assuage those local concerns are so important, because right now the agency is facing a much huger challenge. And that is, as many of you know, in the nation of Canada, they did a discovery of this horrible record of Native children being stolen and taken away from their families to be sent to Christian boarding schools many decades ago. Then Deb Haaland at the Secretary of Interior did her own research for the United States and found out that we had a similar record here in the United States. One of those sites where they believe there could be buried Native American children is right along the alignment to connect Seattle to Tacoma. And as Roger knows well, here in the state of Washington, when it comes to Native American rights and the respect that we have for those Native communities and our relationship with those Native communities, if we have to dig through and find that that is in fact a burial ground, the project is dead in the water. There's nothing to mitigate. They will have to select a completely different alignment with some delay and cost involved in that. I say all that because it comes back to the mayor of Fife. Those burial grounds are not in the city of Fife, but the mayor of Fife, us having heard her concerns on a hamburger joint, is going to be more prone to help us liaise with the Puyallup Tribe of Indians. The Puyallup Tribe probably owns more than half the property within her city. They are partnering on stuff every day of the week. She has a relationship with the tribe that we could only hope to have. And I have no doubt that she is going to help us work through that problem because we listen to all of our other concerns, which takes me back to my original point. Um, Agencies should be using their boards as representatives of the agencies, not just taking the incoming, but having them put out the outgoing to the community, because frankly, they are hearing those voices just as loud, if not louder than we are. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Roger. I thought it was really interesting, that idea that you can't just steamroll your project. You have to be flexible and you have to be creative, and you have to listen to people. Roger.
Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Mhm.
Great. Well, I'm going to kind of take a higher level approach to this intro and then dive into a topic of importance to me right now. I think when you talk about leadership and collaboration, it is a learned skill. You can become competent in this if you're not already. I started in Boy Scouts. I'm an Eagle Scout, and leadership from the get-go. When I ran a dining hall at age 13, I learned a little bit about collaboration and finding mentors. My first boss out of school, Dick Schmidt, introduced me to an H.L. Mencken quote that I have used to this day. For every complex and difficult problem, there's a solution that's simple, easy, and wrong. And you have to work around that stuff. And other mentors, Diana Mendez, when I worked for her, the mayor of Missoula, Montana, John Engen, when I worked with him, and then Governor Inslee, who I work for currently. I always hiring my own boss or figuring out who my boss is going to be. That's a really important part of the job. Anytime you're trying to get something done, you really have to start from a foundation of ethics and competence to collaborate with you. If they don't trust you, and they, one, that your intentions are pure, and two, that you have the capacity and the capability to deliver on your intentions. And you really do need to have some vision. The vision of a streetcar in downtown Portland, the vision of bus rapid transit from Glenwood Springs up to Aspen, Colorado, the vision of complete streets that work for everybody, whether you're walking or rolling or driving or what have you. And then the notion that departments of transportation can be truly innovative, multimodal game changers. Those are visions that I've worked on in my career. And it's really important when you're working on a vision to be constantly asking yourself, is it about you or about your vision? You really should be thinking in terms of servant leadership. If you're in it for your ego, you're not going to get anybody to follow you. Now, something that I've been working on recently is homeless people in DOT right-of-way. With COVID, there have always been homeless people in rights-of-way, from biblical times to the present day. But with COVID, the public health people told us, leave them there. They're safer there than in congregate shelter. And so the population in our right-of-way grew. And then when we came out of COVID, mayors throughout the state, throughout the country, went to their chiefs of police and said, okay, we need the homeless out of downtown, out of our parks, out of our school properties. And they were swept and swept and swept. And a lot of them were swept to our rights of way. And then people start saying, hey, WashDOT, what are you going to do about all these homeless people in the right of way? This is your problem. I have a lot of people that work for me, but none of them are uniformed police officers. None of them are social workers. None of them have that skill set. So we needed to put together a team. And it was a team that wasn't necessarily interested in helping us, because if you move people out of the DOT right of way, where do they go? I go to the chief of police in Tacoma and say, I need your help moving some people. Well, he just moved them out of downtown. And if he moves them off of my right of way, they might go back. So I'm busy, Mr. Secretary. Try me later. The governor was really interested in doing something, and I told him that I want to stop this kind of sick game of homeless person whack-a-mole. They pop up here, we move them, they pop up again. We weren't solving the problem, we were treating the symptom. He agreed, jumped on it, and we created the Right-of-Way Safety Initiative, where the Department of Commerce, the State Patrol, and WashDOT teamed up. We went to the legislature, we got money for housing, we got money for treatment, and then we went to the communities that we served. We started in 5 counties and said, okay, The way to get homeless people out of our right of way is to get homeless people out of their homeless situation. If we can solve their problem, we can resolve the issue of the encampments. And so we go in, we call it resolving a site. Department of Commerce brings money for housing. We engage the not-for-profit community in these cities. We engage city and county government. We buy or build housing that's appropriate for the unsheltered. And then we go in and we take a census of who's there, and we bring counselors in to identify what their specific needs are. You know, the congregate shelters are a great place for some people, but if you're a victim of domestic violence, or if you're a single parent, or you're a senior citizen, that's not the right place for you. So once we have identified a course of action for each individual, we act on it, we move them, and we close the camp, and we clean it up, and we make sure that nobody goes back. We have had, so far, the people who have accepted our offers of help, 90% of them are still with the program and turning their lives around. And the 25 camps that we've cleaned up remain cleaned up. Now, it's early days. We've got a lot to do, but that's a partnership of people who used to come. When you swept a camp in our right of way, there would be protesters there. They're not anymore. We're making things happen. So, you know, you can do it, but you know, you've got to have a vision, and you've got to not mind who gets the credit for it when it gets done.
Thanks, Roger. Clearly, those are issues that people are dealing with all across the country. Couple of things. For those of you who might be having trouble seeing the video, if you click Media Player on the top left tab, you should be able to see the speakers. And if you enter questions in the Q&A box, we're going to get to them after we hear from Jen. Jen?
Hey, thanks, Phil. And thanks to my fellow panelists. Going last after this is a tough act to follow, but also kind of cool to see and hear about these other cases. And I think we're all going to come at this from slightly different angles, but in a lot of ways are saying the same things. And I hear a lot of what I would say echoed in what you've said already. So hopefully it's not too boring for the audience. I'm going to give a very academic and also Friday afternoon before a long weekend kind of answer to the questions that were sort of set for us as panelists. So here goes. In the book, Mobilizing the Metropolis, which I have here, it just came out last week, if you guys didn't see that, Phil and I make the case that coalition building really is critical to an organization's success, and particularly in functioning in these complex political environments. They just can't get around it. We focus on the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. And if you're not familiar with what that is, the Port Authority is a bi-state partnership between the states of New York and New Jersey that builds, operates, maintains crucial infrastructure like ports, airports, bridges, and transit networks and real estate in the New York metropolitan region. So kind of a big thing that's been around for over 100 years. A product of the progressive era, many people sort of perceive the Port Authority as quite powerful in terms of resources, autonomy, et cetera. But one of the theses of the book is that, you know, even at its most powerful, which is certainly not today, we argue that it could not accomplish its goals unilaterally. And that means that there are lessons there for organizations across the country, whenever they were formed and whatever they're trying to do. All the successes that they've enjoyed in doing projects, and I'm going to leave aside whether the project was good, it's just more that it was able to be accomplished at all, hinged on getting people on board. And most of the failures that we explored were related to where it was very difficult to do that, or they weren't able to build the coalitions that were supportive enough to get them over the humps that they needed to get over. The prompt for this session focused on leaders, and a lot of times, a lot of the literature that's been written to date about the Port Authority is focused on some of the great people that have led it. But one of the things that we do is actually put leaders within their context as leaders within organizations and explore the sort of organizational assets that are important. Leaders are really important, but they're not the only asset, and they're not the organization themselves. and they don't act alone or in a vacuum. And those things are really important. So what makes a leader effective is their capacity to leverage assets, whatever they are, creatively to achieve their goals. And most often, and this is not surprising, this process is not linear. It involves navigating and it involves negotiation, and all sorts of other creative tricks. And in this, understanding the organizational attributes that they have to work with, and what the unique configuration of the problem and policy space that they're in is really, really important. And this is really, really key. We know that the same leader with the same assets to work with is not going to be successful in every situation. So every project presents unique problems, unique coalitions aligned against them and for them. And so this is a very dynamic situation. So yeah, we're interested in leadership and what makes leaders effective, but organizational attributes and what the playing field looks like is something that really matters if you're sort of looking for rules about this. And I'm going to elaborate a little bit more on the former, which is the organizational attribute side of things. And I'll come back to the playing field aspect, the contextual part at the end. So in the book, we put together a framework of factors that we think are important. It's not exhaustive, but that have an impact on an organization's ability to mobilize supportive coalitions. Some of these you've heard from the other speakers already too, in various ways. Resources are obviously the first thing that pops to mind. Now that often is conceptualized as financial resources, but that can also be expertise, technical mastery, control of data and information, and other sorts of things. Reputational resources, for instance, are important. Autonomy is another thing that removes constraints on and like creates more of opportunities to adjust and pivot as necessary. So a lot of times autonomy is rooted in the institutions and sort of the structures that govern the organization, but there are other sources of that as well. Organizational cultures are really important as well. We know that organizations are not monolithic. They have multiple internal cultures. And if those are working well together, then it's a little bit easier to project that vision of cohesiveness, of ethics, of competence, and that people will trust, and the reputation that people will be willing to partner with. And then, of course, entrepreneurial vision and leadership is important. And in our book, in other things that we've done as well, what's important is that leadership is not just the man at the top. In the Port Authority's case, that was invariably a man so far. Like maybe one day there'll be a woman in charge. But the cases that we look at and the incidents that we've looked at come from where leadership has come from men and women from all around the organization who have been really innovative. And one of the things that's been great is where an organization can support and foster that kind of thing. And if we have time in the questions, I can give you an example of a particularly badass woman who was the director of Port Commerce Department and was really transformational for the agency. Okay, so we have this framework. What can we learn from it? What can organizations or practitioners take from it? And I think there are three kind of big points here. One is that every organization needs to build coalitions. It's sort of, again, like I said before, you can't really get around it, no matter how institutionally weak or strong, how much money they have. Every problem requires looking externally and finding partners to overcome issues and get things done. And that has a couple of implications. First one is that first of all, every organization has to do it. And so we have a lot to learn from each other in how to get that done. The second is that asking for more resources or power or autonomy or whatever it is to solve a problem might not be, it might be like an obvious solution in some cases, because sometimes money is what you need, but in other cases, sometimes you need the right partners, you need the right approach, and the right coalitions. And so it's finding those and being creative about those. And the third point from our work, again, is that finding and working with partners, it requires looking internally as to what can be leveraged internally and with the networks and resources that you have to build those coalitions that can get you down the line on your projects. And the final thing I want to just bring up here is that this is an ongoing process. As I mentioned before, the same organizations may be successful in one project, but not be able to find functional coalitions in another. That's normal. There's no magical combination of organizational endowments or attributes that are going to generate success in every single context. And that, long-term and wide-ranging success in building coalitions usually depends on being agile and creative in deploying assets. And sometimes it just doesn't work out. But the important thing is that it's an ongoing process. You can't just win something once and think that that relationship is going to continue forever. That coalition is always going to be on your side. So it's a constant dynamic process of managing this constellation of relationships and adjusting to what each person needs or each organization needs in a given context. So that's a really unsatisfying answer because there's no sort of secret formula that I know of. Maybe someone else does. But what is empowering, again, is this idea that if you know that coalition building needs to happen, then that's the kind of thing that every organization can do to one degree or another to get things done. And that the answers are often internal in finding creative ways to deploy the resources that you have and the networks that you have in order to get things done. All right, so I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Jen. And thanks to all of you. And remember, you can enter your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. I'm going to start with a question for Roger. And that is, as more people are driving electric vehicles, the tax revenue from gasoline sales is going down, and the states need to find an alternative source of funding. So as a president of AASHTO, as a secretary of transportation, and all the other hats that you have, how can officials create a coalition to find alternative sources of funding so that we can ensure that we maintain our system and improve our system?
It's a great question. If I had the answer to it, I'd be doing something else. But I know how to get started on that. We have here in Washington State, the governor is very passionate about decarbonizing transportation space. It's 40% of our greenhouse gases come from the transportation sector. And so we have committed. We have our Climate Commitment Act, where we have a cap and invest program. We have a clean fuels program and the like. So we have policy that's decarbonizing the transportation space, but all of our funding mechanisms are based on selling carbon-based fuels. So how do you get out of that box? Well, one, you have to have a sense of urgency. And I think we're reaching a turning point, a point of inflection where, yeah, it's getting urgent because more and more electric vehicles are coming online, more and more technologies. We're very excited about hydrogen fuel cell technology for long haul trucks and the like here in Washington State. So the sense of urgency is coming. The technology is relatively easy. It's the policy conversations, and the policy conversations will occur as it becomes more urgent. Now, in the professional side of this, as opposed to the political side of this, we have coalitions in place already. I'm on the board of a group called RUC America. It's a road user charge consortium made up of multiple states. And some of our states are deploying road user charges, Oregon and Utah. Hawaii is getting close. Some are considering it. Some of them don't want to be seen as even talking about it because of the politics. Now, on the political side, is it replacing the gas tax, or is it an additional fee above the gas tax? People are skeptical, shall we say. What is it spent on? Is it just spent on roads? Is it spent on roads and transit? Is it spent on, general fund kinds of things? Do you charge everybody the same, regardless of the trip purpose, the time of day, the location? Those are policy calls that are going to have to be made at different levels of government. The Transportation Commission here in Washington State elected to recommend that as a replacement for a gas tax, which is constitutionally restricted to just highways here in Washington State, as a replacement for the gas tax, the road user charge should be restricted as well. Now, I sit on the Puget Sound Regional Council Board, and they have a financial plan that's based on congestion pricing, so time of day and the rest of that, and using that money to pay for transit and walking and biking in addition to highways. So working through the policy conversation is where the coalitions are going to have to do their heavy lifting. I think the coalitions exist. Here in Washington State, it's our Puget Sound Regional Council, our other metropolitan planning organizations. In the professional space, there are coalitions that exist, but they're going to be tough political calls. And I cannot tell you which way it's going to go here or elsewhere. I know which way it's going in Utah and in Oregon because they've made the lift.
Okay, thanks. So, Peter, here's a question for you. Somebody wrote, how can agencies balance the tension between building coalition and accommodating their outside demands? So I'm thinking about hamburger places, right? And maintaining the agency's autonomy and accountability. And how do we avoid political hijacking? This person asked.
Well, I feel like answering it the way Roger did is, well, if I had the answer to that, I'd be done. But there are ways. I mean, the one that I think comes immediately to mind, transparency as to what is really the forces in play. And by that, I think when they talk about hijacking, is what others have referred to as hostage taking, which is to say that municipalities, especially when you need to obtain permits from them, sometimes insist on something more than really should be the transit agency's responsibility. In terms of, we've always had the policy, which is actually I think mirrored in state law, is you if you are going to take a property and build on it, you are to return it in the condition in which you found it and no worse. And generally, municipalities are of the mind that if you're going to come through our city and build it, you should be leaving it much better, which can and sometimes include building part of the road network that we never got around to building, in part because you need it for access to your rail station. So this whole issue of who is responsible, and a lot of that, frankly, is partially, if not largely, related to the fact that we have a pretty hosed up taxation system here in the state of Washington that is remarkably regressive, notwithstanding our progressive politics, which makes it very hard for municipalities to pull down adequate resources to pay for their needs. So when a big transit agency with billion-dollar budgets comes marching through, we can be used as a deep pocket. I have found that you can have a reasonable conversation with city managers and city council members about some of these things. You could also point, especially in the wake of the infrastructure law, as well as some real wins in terms of infrastructure funding within the state of Washington, to other funding sources that we could try to help them access for some of their more local needs that we cannot and should not pay for. And the other thing is, frankly, daylight. If it really gets into a hostage-taking situation, you have to be able to muster the guts to tell the media that you're being held hostage, and that this project may not progress on the time frame we want it to because of a insurmountable permitting conversation with city X or Y. We very rarely have had to use that, but it is nonetheless. There are some things that people will say on the public record on what they think the agency should pay for, and then there are some things they'd like to tell us in private what they'd like the agency to pay for, and you just have to take a reasonable but consistent approach. Consistent because there are 52 cities within the Sound Transit Taxing District, and they all talk to one another. So whatever you did very early in the years, long before I got to this region, my understanding is that it was not uncommon for Sound Transit to buy new fire trucks for communities that they were building through, on the grounds that we couldn't fight a fire on your right of way with the trucks we have. Well, is that true, or do they really need a new fire truck, right? But once you build a fire truck for community A, you're pretty much on the hook to build a fire truck for community B. And you really sort of need to get out of that. Interestingly, there's been the board, the Sound Transit Board, another board on which Roger sits, recently had a report from a technical advisory group, which strongly encouraged the board to get a more consistent definition of what betterments, so-called, are permissible and fundable and which are not. The real challenge is going to be when you have the policy, you have to live by it. And get people to appreciate that. One of the things that I have found as a tool is reminding people that we are a public agency that is probably the most audited agency in the state, between state audits, the federal triennial reviews. So people who think that we can pay fast and loose with this money are just wrong. That, it all is going to be daylighted. So make your requests reasonable, and we too will be reasonable for costs that really belong to the agency. And I trust that the agency, I stepped down now almost a year ago, but I'm sure they are still struggling with it. But I was glad to see the advisory group step in to that space to be able to help them do that.
Thanks. So Jen, you have a couple of fans here. I guess you're the academic, so they're asking you this question. One of the things I've experienced on major projects and coalition work is a tendency of agencies to procrastinate the big questions like funding and authority. Agencies will just keep on designing, hoping for the best, and reacting when necessary. Do you have any thoughts about the timing and sequencing of strong coalitions? And somebody also said, can you show or give the title of your book? So 2 things.
Yeah, I responded to everyone there. Oops, how do I angle that properly? Ooh, shoot, why am I? There we go.
There you go.
Mobilizing the Metropolis, out last week. Get it well taught.
Okay.
I put that in the chat too. Hopefully people saw it. That's a great question, Noah. And actually, in doing that, there's a couple. It's a little hard to interpret which side you meant, and so I'm going to answer it both ways. So first, if you're looking at other members of your coalition as agencies who may be also dragging their feet on things, that's actually something that is an excellent point. And a little bit of like the dark side or downside of relying on networks of actors to get things done, right? Is that you are no longer in complete control of what's going on, and you're sort of at the mercy of their processes as well. In those cases, I think some of the things I would say here, and I'm not an expert on this like actual functioning. Actually, some of the other panelists who've had experience with dealing with this might be a little bit better to answer this. So I invite them to comment as well once I'm done. But honestly, it's about, as a lead actor, using your resources as you can to convey urgency and create consequences. And in that case, the discussion of board members and their power is here, might be relevant here, but like leveraging networks and making sure that various members of the coalition are not dragging their feet too far. Also, it like in our experience too, in like the Port Authority case, is often it's about identifying which actors are the crucial ones to win over and to hurry up, and that there's a sort of domino effect. Like once you have one key stakeholder on board, or at least like moving faster, that can remove roadblocks for others. And so I think finding those pinch points and applying pressure in a nice way to ensure that they're on side is important. Now, if you meant the kind of the tendency of agencies themselves, so to drag their feet, so the Port Authority certainly is not immune. They were not always charging ahead with a very well laid plan. Occasionally there's like lots of discussion internally about what to do about something, and many studies followed many more studies to get things done. And I think that's a bit of a different problem. That's an internal issue that's related to the sort of internal mechanics of an organization and those power dynamics as well. And so I don't know if there is a sort of timing and sequencing answer to this, other than, you know, once you have a plan to move forward with, that's like step one of a very long process where building the partnerships and overcoming the even coalitions aligned against you is really important step along the way. I don't know if anyone else has anything else that they want to add to that.
I would add one thing, because here again, I'm coming back to transparency. One of the things that was a frustration when our board was not totally comfortable with a major decision and wanted more time, especially as it related to difficult issues related to a project and where it might be located and what impacts it might be having. There was not, I'll speak for myself, I don't feel I did a good enough job in daylighting that, yes, we can take more time to study this, but you need to know that it is adding time at the other end. That you don't get to take an extra 18 months to pick a locally preferred alternative and think that we're still going to deliver the project on time, right? And that is, was kind of known, but I have to think that if we daylighted that a little bit more publicly, it would have been a little bit harder for those who were seeking delay for the sake of delay. It'd be one thing if we were going to learn something, new, different, material and influential in those 18 months. It's another thing to just try and kick it off past an election, for example, which, when you're dealing with elected boards is one of those things.
Yeah, Peter's right. It's time and money. I think the other thing you have to think about when you're looking at an agency is who really has the decision. There are two things I do not do as Secretary of Transportation in Washington State. I do not appropriate funds, and I do not set state policy. That's done by the state legislature. I get asked all the time, why in the heck are you building more roads? Shouldn't you be spending your money on something like transit? I'm building more roads because the state legislature passes a bill every 2 years and says, here's your budget and here's a list of things to go build. So when you think about, is an agency dragging its feet? Is it really, or is there another party to that conversation that may be the place where you can get some leverage for action?
So, Roger, as the president of AASHTO, it's a coalition of 50 different and possibly more transportation and state
52, yeah.
52, officials. And we live in such a partisan society, right? So you look at Congress and you think that they're always sort of tearing each other apart. How do you keep all 50 together?
There are 52 of us, the 50 states, Puerto Rico, and the District of Columbia that make up the AASHTO board. Transportation, thank goodness, has been largely nonpartisan or bipartisan in the United States. I see a little slippage in that space, and that concerns me. But we as a board, that's one of the things that maybe makes us a little slow to act is you need to have the room, you need to have the board with you to advance policy. But we do advance policy, and we do that by being collaborative, by being transparent with each other, by saying, I can go this far, but no further. We disagree on measuring greenhouse gases, state to state. But some of the really important stuff, when George Floyd was murdered, and our employees, my employees, were out on the interstate protecting protesters from motorists, and angry that their lives were being put at risk because this protest was going on. We knew we needed to make a statement about justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. AASHTO, we crafted a policy resolution that acknowledged the DOT's role in past practices that disproportionately impacted low-income communities and communities of color. And we acknowledge that the consequences of that action persist to this day. We owned it. We committed to listening and learning and doing something different. And we took that to the AASHTO board, and it passed unanimously. And for me, it was a really powerful moment when we went around the room. Washington voted aye, but so did Mississippi, in Alabama and South Carolina. It was a great thing.
Thanks so much. So unfortunately, we've run out of time. We could certainly go for another 45 minutes. I've just been delighted to have our three guests here. I think they're brilliant, thoughtful, and I appreciated their candor. And I want to thank everybody who participated in today's webinar. You can find a recording of the webinar on our website. It's enotrans.org. And the recording will also be emailed to everybody who registered for this webinar. Make sure to sign up for our mailing list, and you can gain access to Eno Transportation Weekly, hear about announcements and some upcoming reports. We're happy to offer our webinar series free of charge. If you enjoy them, check. There should be a link in the chat box. You can learn about donating or becoming a member. I'm excited about our next webinar. On the 27th of June, we're going to be talking about retail innovations at bus and transit stations. Thanks again. And thank you again for the review. And thanks for the audience out there. And all of you have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.
Take care.